Hey everyone, I actually have another story worth telling over video. This one is fairly recent and I'm still reeling from it, so I guess you could call this video a coping mechanism of sorts. I mean, it's probably healthier than the other copes I've indulged in recently, so there's that. Maybe one day I'll laugh about this, but for now, you can do the laughing for me. Well, as you're about to learn, this video isn't the most embarrassing thing that's happened in my adult life, so here goes nothing. I'd worked as a sortation associate at an Amazon delivery station for a little over a year after leaving my abusive second husband, and during this time I was strictly married to my job. I had a few minor crushes here and there, though I never had any desire to act on them. But my don't crap where you eat policy changed when I realized that pretty much the only way I actually could find someone is if I dated a coworker, given the hours spent at the station and general closeness of the community there. Even still, I never actively looked for a relationship. I merely let myself become open to the possibility of getting to know people better on an intimate level. Definitely made some close friends there, but it wasn't until March of 2021 when I would finally meet the guy who completely changed the game for me. Toward the end of the month, we started getting assigned mandatory extra time, or MET, meaning everyone in the station was assigned an extra work day. At the time, I was working reduced time on a 3-10 schedule, so there were people working a full shift on my nights off that I didn't normally see, one of them being this guy. He would stay after hours and help finish the job with me and my friends, who knew him from their overlapping shifts and seemed to like him okay, so I was like, hey, cool, another efficient worker. But I'll be honest, when I first met him, he low-key got on my nerves. He would just randomly ask me if I was okay for no reason, or question why I was putting in overtime when he and my friends were doing the same thing. I got the vibe that he was slightly autistic or something, and those that know me are well aware that I seem to be a magnet for ass-beats for some god-known reason. So I tolerated it and stayed polite for the sake of my friends and for job etiquette. For the next month, I would only see him 2 nights out of the work week on our respective overtime shifts. And then at the end of April, our whole station shift schedules were forced over to 5/8, with having 4 mutual shifts on our new schedule. On our last week of MET, though, he asked me some slightly invasive personal questions about current things going on in my life, then reacted somewhat negatively when I gave a vague but honest answer. I was a little bothered by this, but after giving it thought, I figured it wasn't really an unexpected response to what I said, then put it out of my mind. That was on his extra shift. When my extra shift came a few days later, he apologized for his initial reaction to me, and I was taken aback by his maturity about it. During that week, I had also heard him talking with some other coworkers about various life experiences of his, and I found myself thinking about him on my days off, finding him intriguing and just wanting to know him better, curious to learn more about what was behind those eyes. Now, here's where things start to get tricky. I had found out that week that he was only 21, and at the time I was 33. I had told him my age, and he didn't seem to think it was too late for me to get what I wanted out of life, so I took that as a sign that he didn't think I was old. Granted, he might have thought I said 23, but later he would make comments to suggest he admired me as an older woman. but I'm getting ahead of myself there. Backtrack to our first week at the new shift. We began seeing each other more often, saying hi in passing and making light conversation, much of what was initiated by him. I admit I was attracted to him, but it was because he carried himself as a man much more mature than 21. And at my workplace, we have people from 18 to well in their 60s all doing the same job, so age is pretty irrelevant at my station, given that we're all equals in ability on ground level, so I didn't think much of it outside of wanting to tread lightly anyway, based on my own past experiences. During this time, he would often make comments to me that would have come off as patronizing had anyone else said them to me. But when he said them to me, they were endearing. Stand up straight. Take care of yourself. You're a strong woman. You can handle it. Always within the context of our conversations, of course. He never spoke that way to any of our other coworkers, female or otherwise. I didn't really know what to make of it. I mean, I'm one of the most respected associates at my delivery station, and I'm hardly a loner there, at least no more or less than anyone else, so I don't know why he zeroed in on me and decided to deem himself my personal Jesus. But I decided not to read too much into it first and just take it at face value. Either way, it meant something to me. I thought of his words whenever I was feeling down, even writing them in a notebook that I sometimes sketched in, which he thought was a pretty impressive accomplishment. I remember one time making a joke about the way our shifts were one night off from being identical so that he could have a break from me. And he became somewhat serious and told me that I shouldn't look down on myself. I was taken aback by that, especially since I had legit wondered at some point if I did annoy him. In fact, I remember another time when I wondered if he was getting annoyed by my existence, so I decided to leave him alone that night and tactfully ask him about it later. Then at first break, my friend and I passed him on our way to the lockers, and she struck a polite conversation with him. Normally I'd chime in, but that time I just faded into the backgrounds and let them do the talking. As my friend and I headed out, he asked me where I was stationed that night. From there, we engaged in an epic conversation about his experiences at the delivery station he was at before transferring to mine, various other work anecdotes, and other miscellaneous topics for the entirety of the break, just standing in front of the Employee of the Month board, socializing and laughing for a good 20 minutes, until we were interrupted by the bell starting and I realized we were late. I got switched to Stowe shortly after, and I kind of wonder if that had something to do with it. Either way, my fears were put to rest, at least for that moment in time, and I learned how much I enjoyed his conversations, and I wanted to talk to him more often. There were a few more instances where I was almost late coming back from break due to being enraptured by his conversation skills, but thankfully I never let my workload suffer too much. We did have some conversations before and after work, though our interaction with one another never left the boundaries of the delivery station. One of my favorite routines was when we would say goodnight to each other at the end of every shared shift. Something he initiated and I made sure to continue, which made me feel giddy like a schoolgirl every time. During the last couple of weeks of our interaction, I remember going up to say goodnight to him as he was leaving, and it turned into a half-hour intellectual conversation where I could really feel that we had chemistry going. I felt such a high rush of energy whenever I was around him. My heart was constantly racing, and I found myself short of breath long before the actual work night began. I still wanted to take things slow, but By that point, I decided I was definitely ready to pursue something with him if he gave me the green light. You see, I'm not a romantic person by any stretch of imagination. And honestly, I've become a little black-pilled on the concept over the years as I've come to realize that most normie relationships are based around finding something that matches vague criteria, rather than creating a bond with someone based on admiring who they are. So if I was to pursue anything to that effect, I would want it to grow organically out of friendship. Call it a character flaw on my part, I guess, but I still want to believe it can happen. I mean, there's really no point to relationships otherwise. And I should also stress that I was perfectly fine with wanting to keep things platonic. All I wanted was a chance to get to know him better. In addition to the high-energy conversations, questions meant to get to know me better, and the very specific checks on my well-being, I'd also caught him casting glances in my direction several times when he thought I wasn't paying attention. At first I assumed it was just happenstance, but eventually I caught on, and I would wave to him when he didn't seem to be looking anywhere near my direction, and he would instinctively wave back. Or when I would glance over at him through my own peripheral and see him staring back at me, only to turn away when I met his gaze. I never called him on this, since I figured it didn't necessarily mean he was checking me out. For all I knew, he was paranoid that I was going to come stab him or some nonsense like that, but that didn't really make any sense considering that he would still go out of his way to talk to me and such. That actually did make me a little uncomfortable, since I don't know what his intentions were, but at the same time, I was also enjoying it because I wanted to believe that he felt the same way about me as I did about him. So yeah, I felt like he was giving me some very clear signs that he was into me, or at least some very mixed signals. But it all came to a head on Memorial Day 2021. The whole week leading up to that night had been exhausting for a number of reasons, not exclusive to the situation with him, but also exhilarating exclusively because of him. He had been constantly checking up on me and making me feel appreciated, and I was riding that high all night throughout the holiday shift. But I really did want to test the waters and see what his intentions were by all of it. So at the end of the shift, I caught him as he was about to clock out. I was staying on to collect the devices to bring back to the charger at my supervisor's request, and he asked me about it. After explaining what I was doing with an armful of scanners and zebra phones I had pulled out of the tote next to the punch clocks, I quickly asked him if I could ask him a question. When he stopped to listen, I did my best to tactfully and inoffensively ask him why exactly it was that he was always looking out for me. He gave some vague explanation about how, despite being a cold and emotionless edgelord most of the time, he still did have basic empathy, and he seemed a little worried that I had brought it up. I told him that I wasn't bothered by it per se, I just wasn't used to receiving that kind of attention. I mentioned that I did kind of enjoy it and appreciate it, and that he didn't have to dial it back or anything, but he immediately started to get paranoid that I was uncomfortable with it. He could clearly see that I was getting kind of nervous around him, fidgeting around and occasionally dropping a device or two from my armful, and I explained to him that there was a different reason why I was getting uncomfortable around him. Finally, I just came out with it. The reason I act awkward around you all the time is because I like you. He was in shock. He asked me to repeat myself, which I did. He clearly wasn't expecting it, and I was in shock myself that he didn't show any immediate signs of reciprocation, despite what I was so certain I had seen to the contrary. His first reaction was to ask me once again what my age was, which I told him was 33. and he strongly insinuated that there was something wrong with me for being attracted to someone 12 years my junior. I was hurt, and I frantically began apologizing for being creepy and weird, all the while dropping devices and accidentally beaming myself in the eye with the lasers while trying to pick them up. Then it was his turn to do damage control, as he explained that we were both legal adults and that I didn't do anything wrong and that he just wasn't expecting me to have a crush on him. He made it seem like it had less to do with the age difference and more to do with getting burned by an ex in the past, which is understandable. But he ultimately misunderstood my accidental confession of feelings to be an attempt to get in his pants, and I tried my best to explain that I wasn't actually looking for anything myself, that I just caught feelings on accident and I wanted to get to know him better, because I thought he was interesting one way or another. He didn't outright reject me. On the contrary, he told me that I was, in his own words, allowed to do whatever I want within the legal limits, and that we could more or less continue getting to know each other, and whatever happens, happens. And in the middle of this awkward breakdown, in front of the punch clocks, in front of God and everybody, at the end of our shift, he said the words, "Besides, it's not like I haven't thought about it." I looked up deadpan and went, "Wait, what?" He glanced off to the side and said, "Nothing," in that cute little way that he does. And I stepped into a social distancing space and I demanded seriously, "No, say that again." He repeated his words verbatim, agreeing that he had indeed expressed romantic interest in me, only to flippantly excuse it by saying he thought I was 23 at the time. That got me upset again, and the cycle repeated. He did make some rather inappropriate comments that rubbed me the wrong way, specifically that I ought to fix my life when telling me that I should focus on myself, and correctly guessing my exact weight when reassuring me that he didn't view me as a physical threat. But I was willing to let that slide under the circumstances. When I got home that night, I was so emotional and restless that I ended up popping Seroquel just to fall asleep and numb my emotions for the shift to come, which he wasn't scheduled for as it was his night off, but I still had to force myself through the lingering fear and embarrassment until I encountered him again. On my own nights off, I spent my whole weekend lying in bed, listening to music and trying to process what happened. I felt ashamed that I had made him uncomfortable, and it took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that he didn't actually reject me, that he was actually giving me a chance despite the odds. But at the same time, I was still waiting for the other shoe to drop, since this wasn't my first rodeo dealing with crushes who are on the fence. On Friday, when we were both scheduled to go back in, I popped more pills in a vain attempt to numb my anxiety, in addition to finding out that Primatene is an effective drug to take in the middle of a panic attack. And I asked my back half manager if I could be switched to Stow after first break, since I was too medicated to focus on pick to buffer. And because I figured he didn't want to run into me during the breaks, since he would normally water spider, and both inbound and P2B go to break at the same time at my station. During this time, I started to calm down and feel like I could face him again. I thought I could break the ice by apologizing for spazzing out the previous night, at least, but I didn't get the chance to talk to him until Saturday night. And that's when it all went to hell in a handbasket. I caught him on the way back from first break, sitting by the dock doors and screwing around on his cell phone. Or maybe just pretending to be, since he didn't seem to be caught off guard when I got his attention. I told him I was sorry for being emotional the previous night, and he immediately dismissed it as no big deal. Then contrary to what he had said before, immediately began with the cliches about how it wouldn't have worked out, but that we were still coworkers. Not even friends, just coworkers. And then came the patronizing I had come to expect from him telling me that someday I'll find someone. And his final words to me were, I wasn't a good candidate anyway. I didn't even try to argue or ask for an explanation. I just quietly said, I'm sorry, and went back to the belt. I laughed a bit while commiserating with various friends and coworkers who happened to be in the area. And then slowly I began to break down as I realized everything I had misread, everything that I built up in my mind to look forward to, was destroyed, gone, as if it had never existed in the first place. At lunch, I broke down crying as my two closest friends consoled me, and I didn't care who saw me cry. I explained the situation to everyone who asked what was wrong, not giving out names, of course, just explaining that one of the inbound guys had broken my heart after months of leading me on, and that seemed to suffice. I was moved to Stowe after lunch and spent the rest of the night crying in between scanning packages. Every time I saw him, the tears would flow again, and once I finally clocked out for the night, I broke down again as my friends let me know that they loved me and that he wasn't worth it. When I got home that morning, I spent the first hour or so playing Love Fool by the Cardigans on endless repeat on my iPod, but once I could no longer drown out my sorrow with music, I called the suicide hotline. Now, just to be clear, it wasn't the rejection alone that made me suicidal. There was a whole lot of crap going on outside of this that was building up in the background, and the incident was just what finally pushed me over the edge. I let the operator know that I had a stockpile of Seroquel in my medicine cabinet, and that I was willing to take whatever I needed of it to fall asleep and never wake up again. I actually had to put a post-it note on the bottle the night before, reminding me not to do something like that, so this wasn't something I had come up with on a whim. I'd been on edge for a while, but that's a lot to get into right now. Either way, the operator talked me down, and I was able to play some video games a bit before going to sleep so I can get back in for another shift that night. From then on out, he went out of his way to avoid me. He never again met my gaze or looked in my direction, never spoke to me, spent the moments before shift hiding from me in the men's restroom in the manager's office, then kept to himself by the dock on breaks, once again distracting himself with his phone. Anytime I passed by, he kept his head down, never chancing another glance at me. He would clock out as soon as he was finished rather than putting in overtime like he normally did. It hurt like hell, and it still does every time I see him, but the pain is easing up slowly. I don't know what I ever did to him to make him build me up and treat me like his beloved pet, only to write me off like taxes once my heart came to the inevitable conclusion. Granted, I was never in love with the guy, and I'm glad it never went beyond what it was, because as it stands now, I'll be able to bounce back sooner rather than later. I did a lot of soul searching in the nights to come. I found out that a lot of my coworkers actually disliked him anyway because of his abrasive personality and prideful attitude. And I know from word on the wind that he has a lot of darkness in his personal life that could potentially make him a ticking time bomb, so I guess I dodged a bullet. It actually makes me feel even worse to know this, though, because I'm starting to see that the way he treated me and the way that he takes his role as a top employee for granted suggests that he carries a lot of hatred for himself, to the point where if he is shown a modicum of admiration, he immediately burns it alive out of fear of the unknown. I'm gonna censor my crush's name in this to cover my ass in case someone at work finds this video and spreads it around, but if you're watching this, I hope that one day you learn to value yourself the way you pretended to value me. My crush on you was innocent, and I wish you would have been straightforward in telling me that you weren't interested instead of being the sweet little liar that you are and leading me on. I am fully willing to admit that I may have misread your signals, that I mistook your patronizing for flirting, and for that I apologize. It doesn't have to be like this. I hope that if we have to continue working together, we can at least be civil again. There's a silver lining in all of this, though. One of the guys I vented my emotions to ended up making his move on me, and I agreed that we could slowly get to know each other and see what happens. Which incidentally was all I was offering in the first place. This new guy is about my age and far more down to earth, and I've been enjoying spending my breaks with him on the shift nights we have in common. I've definitely learned a lot from this experience, and I'm ultimately grateful for it because I know now that things are going to get better, even if it hurts for the time being. As humiliating as my confession and ultimate rejection were, I'm still glad I ripped off that band-aid so that I could stop losing myself in my feelings and get back to normal.